All right, so we're going to walk you through the Feed Cubie Lab. I'm Mr. Howard.
Ms. Wilson.
Mr. Buss.
So as you probably already know, your cute little pet Cubie has some requirements. Cubie's diet consists of soaking up dilute sodium hydroxide, that's its food source. And it needs, in order to survive, it needs to have at least 50% of that food source soak into its insides or turn pink. Cubie can only be in the environment for 8 minutes. Otherwise, there's some possible risk factors for Cubie. The goal for this activity is to help you become more comfortable using the scientific method. Scientific method is a cycle that always uses reflection and rethinking. The below diagram is something that's going to help us work through. The very first thing we're going to do is observe and wonder. What are some things we wonder about Cubie, or some observations we can make? Prior to doing that first step here, we just have some materials and safety to go through. It's always important in the science lab. Some different things about Cubie. He's made up of nutrient agar. It's not harmful. It is used to grow bacteria, so it's important for you to wash your hands well after handling your Cubie. Cubie also contains phenolphthalein, which is used as an indicator for basic solutions. The basic solution in this case, or high pH, is NaOH, which is sodium hydroxide. That's the food source for Cubie. There's 3 main safety directions to follow for this lab. Wear your safety goggles, use a plastic spoon for helping to drain Cubie once Cubie's been in the environment for 8 minutes, and always wash your hands really well and wash up your lab station. All right, let's move on to the observe and wonder.
Mr. Howard said the next step would be to do some observing and wondering about Cubie. So that's what this space is below. It's just an open box to record some observations, things that make you curious, things you wonder about. And this doesn't have to be written. You can underline things, you can draw, you can take some pictures. Again, it's just a place to record what you're thinking and in any way, and be curious. After you observe, do some wondering, you probably will have some questions. And at this point, that's when the scientist really becomes part of the lab. You have a question, and that's where you that's what you would write right here, is the question you have after getting started. And then a more formal question, you will get to the point where you'll develop a hypothesis. This is all the possible answers to the question that you had. So we will go through this more in class, but again, you will have, this is the spot where you will record your hypothesis. And next up is when you will actually begin the experiment. All right, so now it's time to actually begin the experiment. So if you look on your document, you were just at the point of developing your hypotheses. You've written that out, and then you're at the section for begin experiment. So the supply list, let's go through those. You need lab goggles for sure. The solution you're working with has a higher pH, so you definitely need to wear those. You need some sort of cutting tool for cutting Cubie. This works. Sometimes something else works, like the ruler even works pretty well, but some sort of cutting tool. You need a jar or small beaker that will be holding the sodium hydroxide, which is Cubie's environment, Cubie's food. The sodium hydroxide, the liquid, will likely be in a large container that your teacher will have. Very dilute, there's a label here, very dilute sodium hydroxide, but use caution when handling it. You have a spoon that you might need for getting Cubie out of the solution. And then you have Cubie itself. Last but not least, you will have your chunk of material, aka Cubie.
You might have noticed that there's a section here that says make a prediction. I think Cubie will survive to a maximum cube size of, and so just kind of take a guess. If you think that all 3 of the cubes might survive in the liquid, then go ahead and write that the maximum size would be the 3 cubic centimeter. If you think that only the smallest one would survive, for instance, you might just write that the 1 cubic centimeter or 1 centimeter per side, one would survive. So just go ahead and make a prediction. It's not going to matter if you're right or wrong on that.
All right, so here we have our Cubie pet, a little organism of auger. You should have something that's similar to about 5 to 6 centimeters in length, and one side that's 3 centimeters or about that. We're going to show you how to cut this into a 3 by 3 by 3, 2 by 2 by 2, and a 1 by 1 by 1 cube. So, as mentioned by Miss Wilson, you can use the ruler to cut, you can use a knife. We'll have different options for you to do this. We're going to kind of just eyeball where 3 centimeters is, and we're going to make a cut through Cubie. Move this side off for later. Turn it on its side. We'll kind of measure here to see where we're at. We're at about 3.75 centimeters, almost 4. We're going to cut off a little piece. We're going to go to this side since it's a little bit smaller. Just going to kind of go through and measure each side, make sure that we're approximately at 3 by 3 by 3. This does not have to be perfect, but do your best to try and get it as close as possible. So there we have our cube, and you can see how it kind of fits right on that spot there. And you do the same thing with your other leftover pieces. You go through and you'll cut a 2 by 2 by 2, a 1 by 1 by 1, and you'll be all set to go. So there are the 3 cubies, 1 cubic centimeter, 2 cubic centimeters, and 3 cubic centimeters. The next step is to add your cubies into your jar habitat. So at this point, you can just use your hands to put them in there. Once you have them all in there, you're going to follow your teacher instructions. More than likely, they'll have the sodium hydroxide up in the front room. They will add some of the sodium hydroxide to your Cubie environment.
Looks like the 8 minutes is up, and so go ahead and since Cubie doesn't want to stay in the food any longer than 8 minutes because of some risk factors, we're going to want to rinse the Cubie. So just simply walk over to the sink and rinse the sodium hydroxide out. You might need to use a spoon to help manipulate the cubes and rinse it as well. And just kind of go through and rinse it a couple times, get that sodium hydroxide out. Sodium hydroxide is a little bit of a chemical that we don't want to get in our eyes and those types of things. So make sure you still have the goggles on for that. All right, if you look below here, the next part is going to be inserting photos, measurements, and other data below. So once you've rinsed the cubes, talk to your lab partner to decide how are you going to answer the question in terms of, with the prediction here, I think Cubie will survive to a maximum cube size of. Now remember, the Cubie needed to obtain enough food so that 50% of their insides were fed. And so, you might want to use some pictures and measurements and include those things in this area here so that you can draw a conclusion from your results.